Our movie starts with an engineer named Clyde. He's insanely good at his job, super smart, and always coming up with brilliant ideas. His little daughter is sitting next to him, designing a new chain of letters for her mom. Clyde compliments her talent and tells her, "I hope you have better luck and a better future than I did." He also tells her he'll never take off the bracelet she made for him. Right then, his wife calls him and tells him dinner is ready. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. She asks Clyde to get it, and they assume it's the delivery guy. But when Clyde opens the door, he's shocked to find two criminals attacking him. One of them, Darby, smashes Clyde over the head with a club, knocking him to the floor. They quickly tie up his hands and feet and tape his mouth shut. Clyde's wife comes out of the kitchen, sees what's happening, and screams. Darby hits her and throws her to the ground. Meanwhile, Mills starts stealing everything he can. He walks over to Clyde with a knife and tells him, "You can't fight fate." Then he stabs him in the stomach, wipes the blood on his shirt, and refuses to leave. Things get even worse when Darby attacks Clyde's wife right in front of him. Clyde completely breaks down. He feels helpless because he can't move or save her. Mills tells Darby they need to hurry, but Darby gets angry and tells him to shut up. Then Darby kills Clyde's wife. When he notices Clyde's little daughter, he says, "Kids really love me." He runs toward her, picks her up, and attacks her too. Afterward, he kills her without showing any mercy. At that moment, Clyde passes out. We then meet Nick Rice, an assistant district attorney. Nick is extremely practical and hates losing cases. He believes getting half the justice is better than getting none at all. That's why he makes deals with criminals, offering them lighter sentences in exchange for confessions or testimony against their partners. On his way to work, Nick runs into his colleague Birmingham. They talk about a criminal accused of assaulting a child. Nick explains that he already closed the case because the suspect had attacked a dog and was underage when he committed the crime. Nick gets to his office and meets with his team. They discuss their current cases, and Nick gives one of them to his assistant, Sarah. She's thrilled because he's giving her a huge opportunity. Then Nick's secretary tells him that his boss, Jonas, wants to see him. Nick goes to Jonas, who asks about Clyde's case. Nick explains that he made a deal with Darby. Darby agreed to testify against Mills and blame him for the murders and assaults in exchange for a lighter sentence. Jonas is shocked. He asks Nick how he could make that deal with someone who attacked a child. Nick tells him the system isn't perfect. According to him, judges and prosecutors can't always get complete justice, so sometimes they have to settle for whatever they can prove. Then Jonas asks what they're going to do about Clyde. He reveals that Clyde is waiting in his office, and Nick has to convince him to accept the deal. Nick clearly doesn't want to face him, but he has no choice. When Nick enters the office, he welcomes Clyde and explains that he gathered some information that could help the case. He also says he came because nobody from Clyde's office was answering. Clyde looks completely broken and depressed. Nick hands him the paperwork, but Clyde calmly takes it, puts it beside him, and asks, "Do you trust me?" Nick explains that Darby agreed to testify against Mills in exchange for being charged with attempted murder instead. Clyde is stunned. He realizes Darby could get only a few years in prison. Nick tells him Mills will receive the death penalty, meaning justice will be served. Clyde gets furious and rejects the deal, but Nick tells him the deal is already done. He explains that Darby's lawyer could keep delaying the trial for years, forcing Clyde to spend millions trying to prove their guilt, and even then, they might not have enough evidence. Clyde reminds Nick about his testimony and the blood evidence on Darby's clothes. Nick tells him the DNA found on Clyde's wife and daughter couldn't be conclusively linked to Darby, and Clyde's testimony probably wouldn't hold up because he had lost consciousness during the attack. Clyde realizes his objection means nothing because the deal has already been signed. 10 years later, we see Nick living in a new house. He's getting ready for work when his daughter asks him to taste something she cooked. He loves it and jokes that her future in cooking might be even better than her mom's. His wife reminds him about their daughter's music recital. Nick says he has too much work and asks her to record it like usual so he can watch it on his day off. His wife gets upset. This isn't the first recital he's missed. She tells him he's neglecting his family. But Nick leaves for work anyway. He meets Sarah and asks about her relationship. She says she keeps putting off marriage because of work. Nick takes her to the prison to witness Mill's execution. Inside the execution chamber, Mills is strapped to a moving bed. Before the execution begins, he admits he's a terrible person and deserves punishment, but insists he never killed Clyde's wife and daughter. He tells everyone they're about to execute an innocent man. Nick looks down because deep inside, he knows Mills is telling the truth. Darby's lawyer is also there, acting like he doesn't hear anything while flirting with Sarah. At the same time, Nick's daughter is performing beautifully at her music recital, making her mother incredibly proud. The execution begins. Mills is injected with the chemicals that are supposed to knock him unconscious and prevent him from feeling pain. But something goes horribly wrong. Instead of losing consciousness, Mills starts suffering terribly. His body begins burning, and the entire room is horrified. Sarah can't handle it, so Nick takes her outside. Everyone is shocked by what they're seeing. The prison director tells Nick that the execution chemicals were switched with different substances. Someone deliberately wanted Mills to suffer before dying. Then Nick notices something written on the tube. "You can't fight fate." Nick remembers hearing that exact phrase from Darby and from Clyde before his family was attacked. Suddenly, Nick realizes someone is coming after Darby. He gets a police team together and orders them to pull every piece of information they can find on Darby. They discover that Darby had already served his sentence and was released after 3 years. Meanwhile, an unknown person calls Darby and somehow knows everything he's doing. Darby panics, grabs his gun, and asks who the caller is. The stranger tells him the police are coming to arrest him and offers to help him escape. Darby actually believes him. He follows the stranger's instructions, running across rooftops until he reaches an abandoned warehouse. The stranger tells him to get into a police car waiting nearby. Darby gets angry and asks why he would ever get into a police car. The stranger explains that the officer has been drugged and tells him to move. Before the officer wakes up, Darby follows the instructions and takes the officer's weapon. Eventually, he reaches an abandoned location where the stranger tells him to get out of the car. Darby begs the officer to let him go because he has a wife and daughter. While Darby is distracted by a phone call, the officer pulls out his phone and calls the stranger. Darby answers and asks what he should do next. That's when the officer removes his wig. It's Clyde. Clyde laughs and reminds Darby that his wife and daughter were taken from him. Darby gets furious and pulls the trigger. But suddenly, his entire body freezes. Clyde reveals that he replaced the gun with a weapon designed to inject a substance that paralyzes the entire body while keeping the victim completely conscious. Clyde takes Darby to his warehouse and straps him to a bed. He tells Darby that he wants him to experience the same helplessness Clyde felt when he was tied up and forced to watch his family being attacked. Clyde injects him with adrenaline so he won't pass out. He shows him the tools he plans to use, and even places a full-length mirror above him so Darby can watch everything happening. Clyde puts on a mask, turns on a camera, prepares his equipment, and begins his revenge. Afterward, he changes clothes, lets the police officer go, and disappears. Meanwhile, Sarah gathers everything she can about Darby. She tells Nick that Darby was a disgusting, violent man with absolutely no mercy. But Nick notices something strange. Darby usually committed his crimes without leaving obvious damage to the bodies. Then police arrive at Darby's location and discover his remains in a horrifying condition. The detective calls Nick and tells him they finally found Darby. Nick immediately asks Sarah to dig into Clyde's background because Clyde is the only person with a clear motive to kill both Darby and Mills. Sarah discovers that Clyde owned the warehouse where Darby was found. She also learns that Clyde had invented several devices over the years, made a fortune, sold most of his property, and invested in industrial facilities, chemical plants, and areas near the airport and railroad. Nick tells her to find every detail she can. Meanwhile, Clyde is sitting calmly inside his warehouse, waiting for the police. When he hears the sirens, he simply stands up and surrenders. Nick is confused by how calm Clyde is, especially when Clyde looks at him and smiles. After Clyde is taken away, the police search his place. Nick finds a law book and wonders why an engineer would own one. Then he finds a picture of Clyde shaking hands with Darby. Clyde is taken into custody and interrogated. Nick, Jonas, and the detective watch and listen. Meanwhile, a package arrives at Nick's house. His wife remembers their daughter's recital recording and plays it. She suddenly sees footage of Darby being killed and screams for her husband. Nick decides to personally interrogate Clyde. His wife calls him, but he ignores the phone. When Nick enters the interrogation room, he shuts off the cameras and microphones. He tells Clyde that what he did was right, that he stood up for his wife and daughter and got rid of people who deserved it. Nick even admits that if he were in Clyde's position, he might have done the same thing. Then he turns the recording equipment back on and starts questioning him. Nick asks Clyde if he killed Darby and Mills. Clyde calmly says, "I wanted to." Nick thinks he has finally gotten a confession, but Clyde tells him that wanting someone dead doesn't mean he actually killed them. Clyde refuses to hire a lawyer and decides to defend himself. Before Nick leaves, Clyde points out that the police can't prove anything. Nick reminds him that Darby's body was found in his warehouse. Clyde calmly explains that the warehouse is an old abandoned property that belongs to him and that drug addicts frequently break into it. Since Darby was involved in a drug case, Clyde says it's completely possible Darby was meeting his partners there. He claims the police are trying to frame him. Nick gets angry and tells Clyde that plenty of criminals in prison thought they were smarter than him. He asks Clyde what he wants. Clyde reveals that he has a deal to offer. He'll confess in exchange for one simple thing: a better prison bed. Everyone is stunned by how ridiculous the request is. Nick refuses, explaining that prison beds are fixed and he has no control over them. But Clyde gives him very specific requirements for the new bed. When Nick leaves, Jonas gets angry and asks why he rejected the offer. Jonas says it's an easy deal. Nick realizes Clyde is playing them. Then the detective tells Nick that his wife is freaking out because Clyde sent the recording of Darby's murder to their house. They can't use it as evidence because Clyde was wearing a mask. Jonas decides to make the deal. They change the prison arrangements and give Clyde the new bed. The change causes chaos among the prisoners, and Clyde gets a new cellmate. Meanwhile, Sarah tells Nick they couldn't find Clyde's location at the time of Darby's murder. She also discovered that Clyde had made a payment agreement with the Department of Defense, purchased several properties, and transferred them to a company in Panama. But they can't get the company's address because of international legal restrictions. Nick realizes the industrial properties are the key and tells Sarah to dig deeper. That night, Nick goes home and checks on his daughter and wife. The next day, Clyde appears in court. Nick argues against bail because of the brutal nature of Darby and Mills cases. The judge asks Clyde what he thinks. Clyde requests bail because there's still no proof that he killed either man. Then he insults the judge, telling her she doesn't understand justice. The judge becomes furious and denies bail. Nick later visits Clyde and asks why he sent the murder video to his daughter. Clyde says he wanted her to understand the difference between good and evil. Before Nick leaves, Clyde tells him he has another important confession, but only if Nick brings him his favorite meal at a specific time. Nick thinks he's joking. Clyde also asks about Darby's lawyer and says he might know where the lawyer is. Nick contacts the lawyer's wife and discovers that the lawyer has been missing for 3 days. Nick has no choice but to follow Clyde's instructions. He brings the food to the prison. The prisoners are furious about all the special treatment Clyde is getting. The food arrives a little late because of the guard's inspection. Clyde calmly tastes the meal and enjoys it. He asks Nick what time it is and laughs when he realizes they're 10 minutes late. He then asks the prison director for eating utensils and receives a fork. After everyone follows his instructions, Clyde finally gives Nick the location of the missing lawyer. Nick immediately rushes out with the police and heads there by helicopter. Clyde stays behind, eating his meal and listening to his favorite music. He even offers some food to his cellmate. Meanwhile, Nick reaches the location and finds the lawyer's suitcase. They discover the lawyer buried underground while still alive. Back in prison, Clyde calmly finishes his meal. Without his cellmate noticing, Clyde hides a piece of bone between his fingers. Then he suddenly attacks him from the side and repeatedly stabs him in the neck. After killing him, Clyde calmly gets back into bed, wipes the blood off his clothes, and acts as if nothing happened. Nick is horrified when they discover that the lawyer died from lack of oxygen. Sarah then calls Nick and tells him that Clyde killed his cellmate. The prison director has moved Clyde into solitary confinement. Nick goes to see him and asks why he killed his cellmate. Clyde says it was because the man was late for the meal Nick promised him. He wanted to teach him that promises and deadlines matter. Nick gives Clyde the bracelet his daughter made for him. He tells Clyde that his family is probably disappointed in him and that they wouldn't be happy with all the killing. Clyde touches the bracelet and remembers his daughter. For the first time, he breaks down and cries. Nick returns to his office. Sarah tells him she can ask her boyfriend to help identify the properties Clyde purchased. Then Jonas arrives with new information. They found one of Clyde's former close friends. Nick talks to him and discovers something shocking. Clyde was actually a former CIA assassination engineer who specialized in designing strategies for eliminating targets without ever being physically present at the crime scene. To Clyde, killing people is basically a science. His friend warns Nick that Clyde is always one step ahead and may even be able to predict what they're thinking. He tells Nick that if they want to stop Clyde, they have to start thinking like him. Nick asks how. The answer is simple. If you want to stop him, you have to kill him. Otherwise, you won't be able to stop him. Nick contacts Sarah and asks her to arrange a meeting with the judge from Clyde's original case. He also tells Sarah to stay at her boyfriend's place and asks for a patrol car to watch her house. The next day, they meet the judge, who agrees to keep Clyde locked up. Suddenly, her phone rings. The moment she answers, it explodes. She dies right in front of Nick and Jonas. The media immediately reports the attack, and the government starts panicking. Nick goes to Clyde and asks why he's doing all of this. Clyde says if revenge was his goal, he had 10 years to do it. So why would he wait until now? He tells Nick he's been watching his movements, as well as those of his wife and daughter, and that he could have killed them at any time. Nick threatens to kill Clyde if he goes anywhere near his family. Then he asks who is helping him from outside the prison. Clyde laughs and says nobody is helping him. Then he makes Nick another offer. Nick must get him out of prison before 6 p.m. and drop all charges against him. Otherwise, Clyde will kill everyone on Nick's team, including Nick himself. Clyde is taken back to solitary confinement. Nick calls Sarah and orders her to search through all the prisoner files to figure out who could be helping Clyde. He also tells the rest of the team to stay at the prison until the deadline passes. They all stay there overnight. When 6 p.m. finally arrives, everyone watches the clock. The deadline passes. They breathe a sigh of relief. Nick allows everyone to leave. But the moment they get into their cars, the vehicles start exploding one after another. Sarah's car is among them. Nick watches helplessly as she dies. The media announces that 6 people from the Justice Department have been killed. Investigators discover that the cars were triggered remotely by a wireless device. Nick and Jonas meet with the mayor. She's furious that they can't control Clyde. Jonas tries to explain that Clyde is incredibly intelligent and completely ruthless. The mayor gives them one final deadline to get the situation under control. Nick goes home and tells his wife and daughter that they're leaving for a while and will have heavy security. After dropping them off, Nick returns home and finds his picture with Darby sitting on the table. He realizes someone has entered his house. Nick grabs a weapon and heads straight to the prison. He attacks Clyde, blaming him for Sarah's death and the deaths of innocent people. Nick asks Clyde what would have happened if he had accepted the original deal and allowed Darby and Mills to walk free. Clyde tells him that at least Nick would have done his job and could have lived with his head held high. The detective raises his gun, ready to kill Clyde, but Nick stops him. Nick later attends Sarah's funeral. He talks to Jonas and asks, "Was I really wrong?" Jonas tries to calm him down. They leave with heavy security. Suddenly, we see someone remotely controlling a tank-like machine, equipped with a machine gun. The vehicles stop. Nick learns that the electrical system has been shut down. Then gunfire suddenly hits Jonas' car. Nick jumps out, but his men stop him. A moment later, Jonas' car explodes. That night, Nick meets the mayor. She blames him for everything that happened. Nick offers to resign, but she refuses. Instead, she makes him promise that he'll protect the city and stop Clyde. She activates the emergency system and orders the city sealed off to keep everyone safe. Nick begins looking through pictures of Clyde's wife and daughter, trying to understand what pushed him this far. Then he realizes something terrifying. Darby really was a disgusting person who deserved punishment. Nick starts thinking the way Clyde thinks. Then he receives a message from Sarah's boyfriend. Even though Sarah is gone, she had already helped him find the locations of Clyde's properties. Nick thanks her in his mind and starts marking the locations on a map. Eventually, he finds a warehouse. They break into it illegally and search the place. Inside, they discover equipment bombs, explosives, police uniforms, janitor uniforms, and all kinds of hidden tools. Then they discover an underground tunnel leading directly to the prison. Clyde had secretly built tunnels underneath the prison cells, including solitary confinement, allowing him to move in and out without anyone noticing. They also discover his plans to blow up the city hall, and they realize Clyde has hacked into the entire surveillance system. Meanwhile, Clyde disguises himself as a janitor and enters the building. He plants the bomb and successfully escapes. Nick and the detective rush there as fast as they can, but Clyde is already gone. They search the building and eventually find the bomb inside the conference hall. They call in the bomb squad. Meanwhile, Clyde returns to his warehouse, then makes his way back to his prison cell. When he returns to solitary confinement, he's shocked to find Nick waiting for him. Nick tells him, "You taught me never to make another deal with killers and criminals." He orders Clyde to deactivate the bomb. Clyde refuses and apologizes. Nick responds, "I'm sorry too." Then he leaves and locks the door. Clyde uses his phone to activate the device connected to the bomb. At that moment, the detective is inside the tunnel. He locks the tunnel from the outside, and everyone runs for their lives. Clyde suddenly realizes he's trapped. The bomb is underneath his bed. He grabs his daughter's bracelet and stares at it. Then the bomb explodes. Fire erupts from underneath the bed, destroying everything around him. Later, Nick finally attends his daughter's music recital. For the first time, he's there to watch her perform. He's proud of her and finally understands the lesson Clyde forced him to learn. Justice isn't always about taking the easiest deal. Sometimes you have to do what's right, no matter how difficult the consequences are. And Nick finally realizes that his family deserves the same attention and dedication he gives to his job. And that's where our movie ends.